Alright, chapter 26. We're missing Vicksburg, that battle. But other than that, the 5 chapters we're doing this week will hit on all the major battle points. Obviously, it's a bigger book and we're skipping a lot because we're running out of time, man! It's almost Memorial Day! Alright. But this will hit on most of the big battles, and I'll play something about Vicksburg on one of the videos. So this chapter will get us through till almost to the end of the war, and then we can do the end of the war, which is good. All right, so let's get to it, shall we? Except my buddy has a new picture to show you. Say hi, Connor.
What's up? So today, yesterday I drew this Yoda. It took me about 30 to 50 minutes. So.
That's awesome.
All right, and Squidward. Did they get Squidward yet?
Yeah, there you got him. I think.
Like me, it looks. May the Force be with you. All right, we ready? May the Civil War be with you. All right. Abraham Lincoln asked Ulysses S. Grant to take charge of all the Union armies. And finally, the president found the general he'd been looking for. Lincoln had noticed that nothing seemed to scare Grant. But then nothing seemed to scare Robert E. Lee either. Those two warriors, Grant and Lee, were now pitted against each other. Lee was an aristocrat, dignified and tough. Grant was an everyday kind of fellow, soft-spoken and tough. Both were devoted family men and decent, and their followers respected that. Grant was anxious to fight it out with Lee and end the war. Both he and Lee knew that the longer the fighting continued, the more likely it was that the northern people would get tired of supporting the war and give up. The southern strategy was to wear the north out. The northern was to end things as quickly as possible. Grant led a huge army south from Washington. He was heading for Richmond. He had almost 120,000 men. Lee had a little more than half that number. Grant attacked and attacked and attacked. One dreadful battle called the Battle of the Wilderness was fought in thick woods. It was horrible. The trees caught on fire and no one could see through the trees and smoke. Tens of thousands of men were killed or wounded or burned in that blind inferno. Neither general was a quitter, nor was either the kind of leader who conserved men. The death list became gruesomely long. The Confederates won the battles. They lost fewer men than the Yankees, but the losses hurt them more, and they had fewer men to lose. And Grant kept pushing on, getting closer and closer to Richmond. So when they say they won the battles, as you know, when we did Bunker Hill, the British felt they had won the battle because they got the hill. But around the Civil War time, they were deciding the winner and loser by how many men died. So America would have won Bunker Hill. That's why it gets all confusing. But, so even though Lee would win the battles, Grant just kept moving on and trying to outflank him and just kept going. And it hurt Lee more than it hurt Grant, because Lee was running out of men. And the North, they still had more men if they wanted. And more slaves were becoming soldiers and fighting for the North. So it just kept spinning out of control for the South. Okay, we'll go on. Grant soon learned what every other Union general knew. You couldn't attack Robert E. Lee and win. Grant had to trap the Confederate army if he was to be victorious. He made plans to lay a siege, as he had at Vicksburg. If you check the map, and I believe it's right above, you'll see that Petersburg and Richmond are not far apart, splendid cities, and unusual. Both combine the industrial spirit of the North with the graciousness of the South. Petersburg was the supply center for Lee's army. 5 railroad lines came into Petersburg. So did several major roads. 2 rivers, the James and the Appomattox, meet at nearby City Point. Petersburg was a key. Without food from there, Richmond, the Confederate capital, would starve. So what happens here is Lee is paranoid of protecting Richmond. He's just obsessed about it. And Grant keeps going around and around, and Lee thinks he's going to go to Richmond, and instead Grant stops and goes right at Petersburg. And that kind of fakes him out a little bit too. And then that's how they get trapped in Petersburg, and that becomes the big siege. And once Petersburg falls, it's good night Richmond. Everyone knows it, and that's what happens. So we'll see. Grant decided to besiege Petersburg. But first he had to get there, and that wouldn't be easy. Petersburg is on the southwest side of the broad James River. Grant and his army were northeast of the James. Lee's was in between and in and around Richmond, and not about to stand aside and let 100,000 men march by. It is hard to believe what happened, but it was something amazing. Grant and his army disappeared. For 3 days, the Confederate army couldn't find them. The Northern army was marching south quickly and quietly. The Confederate army lost track of them, and that gave the U.S. Army engineers just enough time. They put pontoons in the river. Picture rowboat-like pontoons, one next to another, stretched across the water. Then imagine wooden planks connecting the pontoons, and a road laid on those planks. Now you see in your mind an army marching across that bridge, an army that stretches back 50 miles. The bridge was 10 feet wide and almost half a mile long, from one side of the river to the other. I'm not sure I was going to mention that. They built the bridge in 8 hours. It was ridiculous. It's amazing they did that. When men, wagons, horses, and artillery marched on it, the bridge went up and down and up and down. The James River was a swift-moving current, so the bridge always swayed from side to side. It took 2 days to get the whole army across the river. So they built it in 8, but it took 2 days to get everyone across. Then the pontoon bridge was broken up and towed away. The U.S. Army could now march up the west side of the James to City Point. Grant was ready to begin his siege of Petersburg and Richmond. It went on for 10 long, dreary months. 10 months with some fighting and shelling, but mostly it was waiting time. Boring, nerve-wracking, and tense. Are you getting tired reading about this war? Well, imagine that you live in Petersburg and the siege is on. You are hungry, very hungry. Some citizens have siege parties to keep up their spirits. At one party, the only refreshment is water from the muddy James River. Now imagine that you have a brother or father fighting in the war. Or maybe you were a soldier. Starving Confederates stuck in Petersburg all through a long hot summer and then a cold, gloomy winter. Try being a Yankee soldier. You're not hungry, but you are weary of living in a tent, being far from your family, and never knowing when a shell may head your way. A fair number of rebels just sneak off from the camps. Many are mountain boys who never cared about slavery. They're tired of this war. They run away from the army. They desert. The penalty for desertion is death, so the deserters have a problem. They can't go home. They can't get caught. Bands of them roam the South living as outlaws. They have to steal to live. They make life difficult for the Southern people. By 1864, the Southerners didn't need extra troubles. They're having a hard enough time. All of the fighting was now in the South. It was destroying the country. The armies were gathering food from the farms. When they couldn't use the food, they sometimes burned it so the other side wouldn't get it. Then General William Tecumseh Sherman marched the U.S. Army of the West from Tennessee through Georgia and on to the Carolinas. That army's march is one of the most famous and terrible in military history. Honey, in South Carolina, they still hate Sherman, huh?
Oh, yes.
All
He
right.
is not happy there.
He's a hero in the North, but in the South, in Georgia and South Carolina, they hate him. Before the war, red-bearded General Sherman had been head of a military academy in Louisiana. He was asked to be a Confederate officer, but although he had many Southern friends, he believed in the Union. A soldier described Sherman as tall, spare, and sinewy, with a very long neck and a big head. A very homely man, with a regular nest of wrinkles in his face, which play and twist as he eagerly talks on each subject. His expression is pleasant and kindly. Sherman's men call him Uncle Billy. Uncle Billy was about to squeeze the South like that anaconda snake, like Grant at Vicksburg. Sherman broke the rules he had learned when he was a cadet at West Point. When he marched east, he left his supply lines. And an army is never supposed to do that. Sherman gambled that he could find enough food in the agriculturally rich South. He was right. But the Yankees didn't have it easy. They fought a rebel army much of the way. So usually when you leave your supply line, that's it. You can ask Napoleon, you can ask Hitler. That's how they were destroyed. But he said, I can ruin all these crops and keep my army fed by just going right through the fields. I'm going to feed everybody. I'm going to take from them and eat all their food. And they'll not want to fight anymore. Before long, the Northerners were out of control. They too were tired of the war, and they blamed the Southerners for it. So they stole and burned and destroyed the country as they went south. Sherman's army cut a path 40 miles wide. Nothing much was left on that path but empty fields, burned barns and homes, and slaughtered livestock. Sherman believed army battles alone would not win the war. He believed in total war. He thought that the Southern people who were supporting the war needed to be hurt. He believed that the Southern ability to make war, its food and arms production, must be destroyed. His army did a lot of destroying. It was cruel, because many innocent people were hurt. Sherman may have been right. He probably shortened the war, but he left bitterness and hatred and anguish. Those who still thought of war as a patriotic venture with rules of decency would never forgive him. Meanwhile, up north, no one knew exactly where he was or what he was doing. General Sherman seemed to be lost somewhere in Georgia. There were rumors that he was losing battles. People in the north were sick of the war. In every town, people were mourning their lost sons. They blamed the president. They could do something about him. Lincoln was running for re-election. General George McClellan was running against him. McClellan called himself a peace candidate. He said he would end the war quickly. He didn't think slavery should be allowed in the Western territories, but he had no intention of prohibiting slavery in the South. His supporters called him a great general who had been misunderstood by the president. His opponents said he meant to end the Union. A leading Southern newspaper said McClellan's election would lead to peace and our own independence. Everyone was tired of the war. Many no longer cared about the Union. Some didn't care about slavery. It looked as if Lincoln would lose. He was sure of it. I'm going to be beaten, he said. And unless some great change takes place, badly beaten. He might have been right, but a great change did take place. General Sherman won an astonishing victory. He captured the city of Atlanta. Okay. All right. So when he wins Atlanta, that means that everyone goes, oh, maybe the war will end. All right, let's go with Lincoln. I'd rather win the war than lose the war. So that's, and the army, who everyone thought that they'd vote for McClellan because he trained them, and McClellan did a good job training the army. The army voted for Lincoln because the army wanted to win the war. They knew they were going to win soon. All right, guys. Will it ever end?